Now that we know how to get information to a child widget, let's see how to get information back from a child widget. What we're going to do is we're going to make an authenticator widget. It's going to have a username, a password, and a button. When we click the button, it'll check to see if the user's authenticated based off the username and password that they gave. Here we have our main.dart file with our entry point to our application. We don't have a widget yet. Let's go ahead and build the code in our state, and then we'll build a widget. We're going to say bool is authenticated. Now we want a function. This function is going to be our callback. And let's go ahead and set the state here. There we go. And let's go ahead and initialize our state. Now, we need these parts first simply because our widget is going to use them. We're going to create a widget and use this function as the callback. Let's go ahead and let's build that out now. Create a new Dart file. Call it authenticator. And let's use our live template here. Save us a bit of typing. There we go. And let's take this right here and let's just return null. We're going to change all that here in a minute, but right now we just want to return null, get all that stuff out of there so we can focus on what we need to work on. All right, we have a stateful widget and we have a state. Nothing special here. What we need to do now is actually build out the widget state and return that information back out to the parent. Let's see how this works. In our actual stateful widget, we're going to add a value here. Let's call this final, and it's a value changed. And the value change is going to be a boolean. And let's call this unauthenticated. Notice how the ID is complaining because, well, this has not been initialized yet. So let's go ahead and fix that problem. We're going to make a constructor here. And we're going to say this dot unauthenticated. Notice how we still have not initialized this. What we're doing is we're going to use that as a callback here in the main Dart file. So what this code is basically saying, don't worry Dart, we're going to initialize it somewhere else. It's going to be a callback. That's a little bit different because what we've normally done with stateful widget is we've just called the create state and we haven't done anything else. But because we cannot access the state of this widget outside of the widget, we need to be able to pass information back and forth. Let's go ahead and modify our state now. We're going to make a text editing controller and let's call this user. Whoops. Text editing controller, let's call this password. And let's make another value changed. Let's make this also a bool. And we're going to call this unauthenticated. Once again, it needs to be initialized, so we're going to use a constructor. And this is also saying the same thing. Don't worry, Dart, we're not going to initialize it here. We're going to initialize it somewhere else. But because now it's part of the constructor, we can pass it over here. There we go. essentially what we're saying is use our constructor as a callback, and then use this here in this constructor as a callback. So we're just passing it right through. Now we know we're going to have a button, so let's go ahead and make our onClick. And let's go ahead and do some authentication here. Probably the strongest password on the planet here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say not authenticated. And if the username is user and the password is 1234, then we're going to say the unauthenticated is true. Let's go ahead and save that. It did a hot reload without any issues, so we know that it is working as expected here. Let's go ahead and let's change this around. Whoops, wrong spot there. We're going to initialize the state. And in our state, we want to, of course, build our text edited controllers. Now, we need to actually go out and build the user interface for this. This particular widget is just going to have the 2 text fields and a button. So let's go ahead and use a new card. And in the card, we're going to add a padding. And for the padding, let's say new edge insets all. We just want to pad this out a little bit, make it look kind of pleasing to the eye. And our child for this, let's make a new column. Column, of course, takes children. And in here, we're going to say new text field. And let's go ahead and take that down, say controller. And we're going to do the username. And for decoration, because we want the user to be able to realize what's going on here, let's say a new input decoration. And let's do a label text of username. Should be pretty self-explanatory what we're asking the user to do here. Let's grab this. And through the magic of copy and paste, we can do the password. Now, because this is a password, we also want to obscure the text. That way, if someone's on an elevator standing behind you or whatever, they don't see your password there. And let's just pad this out a little bit here. We're going to add a raise button. Let's change this to on pressed. That way it's pretty obvious what's going on there. All right, so we've got our username, password, and our button. When we press the button, it's going to call this onPress, which is going to do some pseudocode that would mimic some sort of authentication in the background. In a production application, you would be going out to like a server or Firebase or something like that, and you would be doing some sort of authentication. Here, because this is just a simple example, we're just going to do user and 1234. Never, ever, ever do that in a production system. I will find you, I will come to your home, and I will lecture you on strong passwords. All right, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and add this in here. So we've got our authenticator in there. Let's add our authenticator, and notice how we want to do the unauthenticated. Let's set this to unauthenticated, which is actually right here. So that's the callback. We're doing this in the parent in main Dart. So all of that code that goes through the child, even though the child has its own state, is actually running right in the parent, right here. And then we can actually set this. Wow, could not spell that. And then we've got the is authenticated. Let's go ahead and restart this whole thing. We've done a lot of changes. And you can see we have our username. Let's type in user. And let's type in a password of just some random garbage. And authenticated false. Let's go ahead and delete this. Put in our top secret password 1234. And you can see now authenticated is true. So that is an example of using callbacks and having the child push information up to the parent.